Well, Bob, why don't you start talking about growing up in Acworth in the 50s and early 60s?
Dr. Scott, I feel that I was really blessed in growing up in the community of Acworth, and the neighbors that we had. I had a mom and dad that took time to raise us, and we had neighbors that everybody knew, everybody on a first name basis. It wasn't a Leave It to Beaver, Ozzie and Harriet type world, but it came very close to that. And at the age when you're 10, 11 years old, things seem to be a little bit more innocent back then. But I can't put a price tag on the community of Acworth we grew up in, and there were times when my allowance was 50 cents for cutting the grass, and would walk downtown to Johnny Green's variety store or Allen's 5 and 10 cent store and take the 50 cents and spend it for baseball cards. My mom was kind of disappointed that I didn't save any, but it's just growing up there in the memories of the downtown area. Mr. Willie B. Kemp had the pharmacy. There was Lacey's drugstore, Collins Furniture Store, and we had the Legion Theater that was there. Next to the Legion Theater was a little, we would call it kind of a restaurant called the Silver Trolley. And sometimes Dad would take me in there to get some hot chocolate and a cinnamon roll, and I thought, hey, I have arrived. This is it. And one of the memories I've got downtown is I was probably 5 or 6 years old, and the scary movie at that time was The Creature from the Black Lagoon, which was being advertised on TV. And I just begged my dad, please, let's go see The Creature from the Black Lagoon. And he said, okay. So we went down to the Legion Theater, and Mr. Cecil Hudson, he did a fantastic job of maintaining that. And we got 5 minutes into the credits of The Creature from the Black Lagoon, and I'm sitting there, and Dad says, do you want to go? And I said, yes, sir. And Mr. Hudson says, we've got a great John Wayne Western at the Lakeshore Drive-In Theater you can come to and see. And I was thrilled to death with that.
So you never saw The Creature from the Black Lagoon?
Probably it was about 30 years later that I was able to see it.
Well, now, I know when I interviewed your parents, I don't believe they lived on Collins Avenue at that time. I forgot exactly where, but did you grow up on Collins Avenue?
Dr. Scott lived there until it was the fall of '59. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it was fall.
Day,
we moved to, the address was 106 Dewberry Circle,
okay,
and moved to a house over there.
And it used to be called the Old Dewberry Farm.
Okay.
That's the street name
Okay.
that originated from.
Yes. So it had just recently been a farm before they moved, before you all moved there?
There were some, let's see, Ronald Eaton, Mr. Autry. Some of them had land out there, and they were starting the subdivision. I think that's known as Lakeview Heights now.
Yes.
But the neighbors, and of course we developed a bunch of new friends and parents, if you will, and but that was, like I say, just an extension of growing up on Collins Avenue, and we didn't, we still kept in touch with our old friends and such.
Who were some of the families on Collins Avenue when you were real little?
Well, of course, the McCalls, and they had, 6 children, I believe, but we were Russell McCall, Claire, Sue,
I forgot their ages. Was Russ about your all's age?
He was between us.
He
was.
was.
A little bit, about a year or so older than me.
Or the Hendersons?
And the Hendersons, right next door to us.
And we would go out and play, there were 4 Henderson girls. Judy, Sandy,
Sandy,
Nancy, and would go out there, after school in the afternoon, and they had a little basketball goal out there, and we'd go out there and play basketball, and just had a time.
The Donahues were right next door to them on Collins Avenue. We saw them. Our parents were friends with the Donahues, and used to, matter of fact, belong to the used to be called the Acworth Ski Club. Of course, this is going back late 50s, early 60s, and Mike and Beryl were their sons. They were a little bit older, certainly, than a little bit older than Bobby, certainly older than me. But had a lot
Y'all
of
were
good
Bobby
times.
and Ricky back then?
Oh yeah, we
Yeah.
try to drop the Y, except around the people from, that we knew from that time, and still go by that. And we did have two families, the Loudons, that worked at Unique Knitting Company.
Yeah,
They were
good
part
folks.
of the Collins Avenue Historic District. That the Loudons had moved down from Philadelphia back when my grandfather moved the mill, Unique Knitting down here back in about 1926, 27. And the Ehlerts, who, by the way, Miss Ehlert lived to be, I believe, 106 years old. She just died about 6 years ago and lived in the house way back when. So. But we had, very good people.
Now, your grandfather Keno, I forgot what year he died. Was he still, did you
He died
remember?
in 1982.
82,
Yes.
the same year that
91 years
that you
old.
sold the business then, the company.
Correct.
So I guess you knew him very well then.
Yeah, well, we lived right next door. He was in the house literally 100 feet from us. We used to have 4th of July parties where he had all of the Kienel family over, our aunts and uncles. Good time. Many of them are still around in the general area.
Right. Have you other memories of your grandfather that you'd like to share?
Well, he used to have what we call the 4th of July party. And that's when all the aunts, uncles, and cousins would get together. He had a little place behind he had a kind of a garage apartment there, but he had a little place back there where we'd get together. And Rick would kind of start around mid-morning.
Yeah.
And it was a time that our parents, this was back now in the mid to late 50s, to sit down and have a Coca-Cola or a soft drink, that was just something you didn't do every day. I mean, if you did have a little 6.5 ounce Coke, you kind of nursed it for a half hour. Oh, this is great. But our parents, they would have soft drinks there. Coca-Colas, Pepsis. I think they had a drink called Barley's Orange.
Oh, yeah.
And our parents would just say, y'all can have as many soft drinks as you can handle. And we were saying, good gracious. And of course, at that age, 10, 11, 12, after about 6 of those drinks filled with sugar, we're just kind of, you can imagine going back and forth. But they supervised us, and it was a time when we would go out and be in the 4th of July. We'd shoot firecrackers and have a time. And I think I even may have some old movies. This is when the hula hoops came out, and it's got about 4 or 5 of us. We're kind of in a hula hoop contest who can do this the longest. But it's just a precious memory that we have. And at the toward the end of the day, they would be cooking hamburgers and hot dogs, and we just thought, hey, you can't beat this.
Well, Bobby's mentioned the fireworks and so forth, and they kept them. Had to drive all the older people crazy a little bit, I'm sure, all the noise and all. But they would actually go down to a place in Grizzletown, just across the county line, and the name of the store was Earwoods. That sold.
Well, you've got a good
fireworks.
memory. I couldn't never.
And gosh, sandcrackers. They even had in the regular standard fireworks, but also M80s and cherry bombs. And of course, they kept those away from us. But it was a good time, certainly.
When in the summertime, would you all walk down to the beach and have time
yes,
down
sir.
there?
I got my Red Cross swimming badge down at the beach back when, probably 6, 7 years old or so.
Yeah, that's about the time.
But that was very crowded. They used to have some amusement rides there. They had the train a little train that kind of circled where a lot of the, just south of the beach now. And gosh, Bobby, what was the swing rise? But it really was a good time.
Okay, so you went to Acworth Elementary, I guess.
Yes, we did.
Talk about that a little bit.
Well, I can still remember most of my teachers. Mrs. Fanny B. McClure was my first grade teacher. Ms. Dolores Hester was my fifth grade teacher. I had a teacher from Hawkinsville, Georgia. Her name was Nellie B. Richardson. Mr. Joe Hamilton was my eighth grade teacher. And Mr. Bill Blocker taught me biology in the seventh grade. And Dr. Scott, both Rick and I were so blessed to have teachers that took any interest in us. And sometimes, going to school at that age, if the teacher was very strict, you didn't think they were the best teacher, but looking back as you get older, you think, I'm just so blessed to have them as our teachers. And they were great mentors toward us, and learned a lot, not only about the courses we were taking, but about life in general, to how to conduct ourselves.
Right. Who was the principal at that time?
T.C. Cantrell was there when I first started,
T.C.
and then Mr. Joe Hayes.
Joe Hayes.
It was a little bit, of course, Butch Price eventually.
Yeah, he came a little after you all
principal
got
there,
through.
but I had Mrs. Price in, I believe, the seventh grade, along with what Bobby said. I had Fanny B. McClure, first grade, and Weta Hubbard. Fern Armstrong, Mrs. Holt, Mildred Holt, fourth grade, Miss Hester, Dolores Hester, fifth grade, and Miss Hollingsworth, sixth grade. And then the seventh grade is when they started rotating, and the students started going to different classes and all. Mrs.
Not until
Denmark, yeah, that was before each teacher taught you, the math, English,
Right.
all the
Right.
basic courses, social
So now
studies.
the teachers
and
are
such.
specialized in the
But we-
seventh. And did you go through the eighth grade at Acworth Elementary?
Yes.
Yes.
And then by the time you all came along, North Cobb opened up in '59, I guess. So,
Yes, sir.
so you both went to North Cobb High School?
Yes.
I went 1 year at Autry, because that was the year
Oh,
at
you got in on
Autry
Autry.
Junior High.
Uh-huh.
And as a matter of fact, the first, they hadn't quite finished the building yet. So we had to, they had to put all the Autry students as well as North Cobb students, and we rotated. The high school students went Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, and the Autry students went Tuesday, Thursday, Saturdays. And of course, going to school on a Saturday, especially with our father, and we grew up with a great appreciation for college football. He went and attended University of Notre Dame,
Yes.
so we got off onto that, and not having to go to school and miss those games. That was that was unfair.
That was torture, wasn't it?
Dr. Scott, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the principal at North Cobb High School, Mr. Steve Cantrell. He had a very tough job with a lot of responsibility, and sometimes he had to make some tough decisions, but he was a principal that I truly respected, the way he conducted himself and his relationship with the students. And one of the things, this was back in '64, of course, we had the invasion of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and when you're 15 and 16, you're thinking, well, I'm going to let my hair come down over my ears, and Mr. Steve Cantrell put out a directive, there will be no long hair over your ears. And back to his word was law. And if you didn't do it, not only were you in bad graces with the principal, but your parents, when you got home, they would deal with you also. And some of them we tried to push the envelope a little bit as to how long our hair was going to be. But I'll tell you what, Mr. Steve Cantrell was a great principal to everyone up there.
A lot of good teachers.
He was.
There.
So did either of you have long hair later on?
Longer.
Longer.
Of course, I
Everybody
had
had
more hair
longer.
later.
Yeah.
Wish I had some of the hair back now.
But not long, not real long.
Not real long, no.
Okay. Now let's see, Bob, I think you were too early for integration but Rick, you must have been there right about the time that first black students.
Autry, that would have been the fall of '65, and I believe, Bobby, you did have.
We were the
first
class of
graduating class that was
1966.
integrated in
Oh,
the
you 66, so you were in
66,
on it.
And
1 year.
we had probably 6 students, and I think they were probably going, and correct me if I'm wrong, Rick, it was Lemon Street High School that they were going to.
Many
no,
of them
that
had
was in
gone to Lemon
Marietta.
Street
Yeah,
before.
Marietta. But we had a couple of them on the football team, and just great people to associate with.
It was certainly new, different. We didn't know really what to expect, and I'm sure the black children, same thing.
Oh, I guess
it
so.
was just new for everybody. And something that resonated with me, we were outside after football practice one time, Dr. Scott. And, and this is not meant like some people might use it today or even back then, but we were trying to, get to know each other. Now, let's see, you're so-and-so and you're so-and-so, and somebody made the comment, well, everybody looks the same, and, that kind of thing. And one of the black kids said, hey, all of y'all look the same to us too. And that has resonated and obviously stayed with me, thinking, hey, they were on the same trial that we were in that regard.
So these were
But
not,
we had good people.
these are not folks that you knew already.
No, sir.
No, sir.
Was there much, I've heard some stories about people playing ball together across the tracks and what have you, but not your experience? Blacks and
In
whites
Little
and-
League, that was not integrated at that point in time. Of course, that was a little bit earlier in the '60s for me and
Yeah,
even
for formal
for Bobby down at we played.
But y'all
Wilson
didn't
Clark.
get together
We
at
did
all?
not,
No, sir.
No, sir. On any kind of formal.
So the railroad track was a real
school.
dividing line?
That was, as the case may be for that time, it was.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let's say you graduated in '66
Yes, sir.
and '69?
69.
Okay, and then what did you do after that?
Well,
Both went to college?
I'll start,
Go ahead.
Bobby's
Okay.
been going. I went to follow my father up at University
You
of
went to Notre Dame.
which I attended for 2 years.
Uh-huh.
And let's just say I had some little bit of maturing and growing up to do. Transferred down, went to, after 2 years, my sophomore year, went to Kennesaw Junior College for 1 quarter. There were quarter system back then. And then went to the University of Georgia, and where I graduated, met my wife, so that was a good thing that came out of all of that. And we're been married going 44 years
Wow,
now. So,
that's great.
so
That's
that
great.
was a good thing. Then after that, went to work up at the hosiery mill.
Right, I want to talk about that in a few minutes.
Okay.
So you graduated from UGA. I thought you were going to say it was too cold in South Bend.
It was that was the case also. As a matter of fact, we used to get what they would call black snow there. Occasionally, not always, just periodic, maybe a couple of times a year. And that was a result of all the blast furnaces over in Gary, Indiana,
Oh, I bet.
where they would have soot and everything, and it would get just tangled up with snow, and it would just be kind of a splotchy, grayish snow. But yes,
sound
that
very
was, we used to get maybe more snow in those days than we get now in this area, but a lot up there.
Yeah,
A lot up
yeah.
there, and it was cold.
Right, great. So Bob, what did you do when you got out of?
Well, actually, my mom probably applied to about 4 different colleges and got accepted at the University of Alabama. And my criteria for going to Alabama is, oh boy, I'm going to get to watch some football. And Dr. Scott, I'll be forthright with you, I was not mature enough and did not manage my time to apply myself in college. And actually, one summer went to Kennesaw Junior College to try to bring up my grades.
Did that work?
It did somewhat. I actually made the dean's list on the right side of the dean's list. But then looking back, and I guess in retrospect, the Vietnam War was going on, and I knew I would probably be drafted at some point, and did not register for the fall quarter of '68. Now, all this, I'm not telling my parents, Bobby and Betty, about this, and went down to the square.
You didn't tell them that you didn't register for school?
Did not could put it off.
Fall of '68.
And my mom kept asking me about this, but I'd gone down to the square in Mary where they had all the recruiting offices. Prior to this, let me back up a little bit. Ricky Hudson had gone down, and we went down to the draft board in Marietta and told the lady there that we were not registered to go to school in the fall. And she said, well, y'all will probably be drafted in October or November of '68. And at that particular time, the Marine Corps was looking for warm bodies, and they were drafting people. And I'm thinking, going to Vietnam would be kind of iffy, but going by way of Parris Island, South Carolina, I don't know if my constitution could handle that. So I actually went down to the Air Force recruiting station and talked to the guy, and he said, I don't have they called it back in billet numbers for you. He said, I am filled up until November. And I said, I need to get in before that, and went over to the naval recruiting thing and walked in there. They had plastic models of ships and everything in there, and they had this master chief there who was getting ready to retire, and he said, partner, can I help you? And I said, well, I was thinking about enlisting in the Navy. He said, well, son, you've come to the right place. Sit down right here. And we had probably about a 20-minute conversation. He was telling me about the do's and don'ts, what to expect. And before you know it, I am signing papers and this and that.
And your parents didn't even know it?
I didn't know it at the time. And went home and told my dad first.
Now, wasn't he in the Navy?
Yes, sir, he was. He was served in the South Pacific during World War II. But told my dad put his arm around, he said, son, I think it would be a growing experience for you to learn to grow up. And went in, and I can remember this, my mom was cutting up chicken to fry. And my dad says, you got to tell your mom. So told her, and she says, I'm not going to cry, I'm not going to cry. And she started crying. But the 4 years I served in the Navy, the people I served with, so fortunate. And that's, Dr. Scott, that's when I learned very quick that the world did not revolve around little Bobby Kienel. And I learned to grow up and accept responsibility, and some of the closest friends I've made in my lifetime I served with in the Navy. Can't put a price tag on it.
So you were in the Navy from '68 to '72?
Yes, sir. Went in, and actually it went in September 9th of 1968 and got out September 8th of 1972.
You remember those days?
I remember those days. And it's, as you get a little bit older, and I don't know if anybody can relate to this, I can remember things that happened 50 years ago, and then you can't remember what I had for lunch today. But I think it just comes with the territory.
Okay, and then you came back to work at a unique company?
And I'll tell you, I can't emphasize this enough. The employees we worked at Unique Company, I can't put a price tag on.
No.
The people there,
Salt of the earth.
they were, and they made my job easy. And Ines Cochran, who ran the finishing room, did a fantastic job. We'd be here for a half a day to name everybody, but one of the people I do want to mention is Mr. Bill Smith. He was in charge of maintenance, and running a knitting factory like that, things have a tendency to break down. And it could be something with plumbing, the electrics part of the machinery. And Mr. Bill Smith would sit there, and he would meet my dad, and he'd say, let me study this for a second. And he would figure out a way to make everything work. And even I worked with him one summer, and he taught me how to thread steel pipe. Yeah, and it was, but he was.
These were 8-inch pipes, 6 8-inch, not.
but he was Mr. Bill Smith. You just can't. And everybody we worked with was just like that.
So you started there in '72, and then when did you start there?
I graduated in '73, so that probably around the December of that year.
Okay, so
I
72 and
graduated the
73.
fall quarter of '73.
So you're both working there together?
Well, I started there, and actually I'll say, because I think our father knew what good it would do. You know, we can go and we can be taught the academics, certainly in our great school system that we had in that point in time. But to give us a work ethic, and I think, Bob, you did too, to some degree. We worked there summers, starting when we were probably
I was
around
gonna ask
14,
about that, whether
15
you grew
years
up
old,
working in there.
working for 3 months. Of course, then, you know, it used to be schools would let out Memorial Day, wouldn't start back till Labor Day.
Right.
So we had a good 3 months there, and we would work basically finishing room, but the people, and to earn their trust, and you know, lead by, you know, leadership employees just by example. And it took us, and these were the good employees that influenced us very positively until to this day. We got that work ethic of you know, carrying our load, and then maybe even a little bit more so, more than our load. Like I say, great people working those summers, and got that work ethic that helped us out throughout the rest of our lives.
Oh, one particular summer, and this was the summer where I turned 16, my dad asked me, he says, what are you going to do this summer? Oh, I thought I'd hang out down by Acworth Beach. He said, no, I think you're going to, he said, I want you to come up to the mill and work, and you're going to be working with Mr. Cliff Smith in the receiving department, and I want you to work with him. And at that particular time, I think we had been to Florida, and Honda had made this little, it wasn't really a motorcycle, it was a scooter. It was a 50cc motor scooter that I had really wanted. And my dad said, this would be a good time for you to earn the money, and you could buy that scooter. I said, well, that sounds good. And Dr. Scott, the first paycheck I got, I was making $1.25 an hour, 40-hour week. $1.25 times 40, $50. Well, the first paycheck I get, I'm looking at it, $38. They made a mistake. So
Taxes.
So I would have thought, I says, I'm making $1.25 an hour, it should be $50. Well, the ladies, they kind of look at each other and wink and kind of grin. They said, well, we have to take out money for Social Security, this and that and everything. Well, that's not fair.
Nobody told you that.
Welcome to the real world.
Well,
You were getting $1.25 an hour. I started at 75 cents an hour. So,
Well, God bless you.
But by the end of that first summer, and I had my passbook for a long time at the Bank of Acworth. By the end of that summer, I had saved $101.
How about that?
And I thought I was on top of the world,
Yeah.
even with all the withholding and such.
Now, how old were you that summer?
That was the summer I turned 14.
14. So 75 cents an hour, I guess, was all right.
And it was probably more than I deserved.
Now, how many workers were there in the factory at that time, do you think?
It would vary a little bit. Our business was somewhat seasonal. I would say we went from a low of around a little over 100 up to maybe 130, and that was true for just about the entire time up until 1982. That even as we grew the business, and of course, one of the things that our workers were concerned about was automation, because that would put somebody out of a job. If you can go look, Queen Elizabeth I, back in the late 1500s, had that problem when they actually invented circular knitting machines, that it was going to put so many people out of work. So she did not grant the patent, one of the old stories. But what we would tell our people was, well, what we want to do is let the same amount of you produce more, not have less of you produce the same amount. So, you know, and
It's a good philosophy.
our big shipping periods were back to school, which we would begin in the June, July time frame, and so-called Christmas peak orders. So beginning in January, we would be running a lot of inventory, stockpiling for those peak periods.
And I guess your big product was the Argyle socks?
That was one of them. That was probably what we had the best margin on, because not everybody had the machines. Those were called a CKA machine, made out of, I think they were made in Reading, Pennsylvania. And I think we had around 30 to 40 of those. It took a special gentleman named Jimmy Henderson was the...
Oh, he's a great guy.
Another good employee that was what they call a fixer. Then we had, Howard, Luther Millsap. We had Bentley machines. We had athletic tube sock machines. And it took different, they were all similar in a way, except for those CKA machines, but men's dress socks, they even, I know, and this was before I started working there, but when fishnet pantyhose were popular, they made some of those on those CKA machines, the same ones they did the Argyles on.
So you had quite a variety of products then?
Yes, sir.
We had one, this was back, Ricky, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was 74. We were making tube socks. Basically, it's a white athletic sock, and it may have some, there may be red, blue stripes. And I think it was 74. The University of Oklahoma was, after football season was over, they chose to be #1. And so we were having a conversation over coffee one day, and I was thinking, I see all these T-shirts that say Oklahoma #1. Why don't we get a hot iron transfer and put it on the tube sock? And we think, well, we don't know if that's going to work or not. And I said, well, let's invest $50, $60, get the transfers and put it on there. Well, we had a customer out in Oklahoma with McCubbin.
McCubbin hosiery.
We sent them a sample of that, and this was back before the internet. We got a letter back from them. How many of these can you get us? And we need them quick.
How quick can you get them to us?
we could not make enough of those, and that became
and what year was that?
Probably 1974. But we started doing a lot of collegiate transfers. You had to be real careful because a lot of the logos had a trademark on them, so you could not. Yeah, you could not violate that. But
and some of the schools, actually, it was legal at the time we started doing it, but as the logo enterprise got bigger and bigger, not just on hosiery, but certainly T-shirts and such. The state colleges started copyrighting it after we had, and a lot of other businesses were doing that. So then we had to be careful. Of course, the private institutions were copyrighted. So, but we were doing high school. There was a company called E.R. Moore Company that provided a lot of caps and gowns for graduation purposes and all, but they also got into that. They were located in the Metro Chicago area. But, very good business for quite a few years.
I bet. Well, now, was your grandfather retired by the time you all started working there full time, or was he still coming in?
He would come in, but he did not take an active participation in the running of the business. That was pretty much our dad, who about, like I say, by that time, because he graduated in 1949. And I would say pretty much by the late 50s, he, had taken over general manager of the business there.
I think he describes in that interview about when he started there, it sounds kind of like your all story, that he was doing everything to learn the business.
Well, that's, yes, Started in the the knitting room, the looping or seaming room, that was where they would close the toes, so forth. Then what Bobby, the dye house that Bobby worked in quite a bit, took responsibility for making sure all the chemicals, dyes and stuff. And I mean, you can talk more about that. And then the shaping, the boarding room, and then the finishing.
It's a great education to have all those skills.
But it is.
It was. It absolutely was.
To run the business, that was, you needed to know all the aspects. And then also, occasionally we were afforded the responsibility, and it was kind of a Nice thing in a way to go up to the hosiery conventions and meet other mill owners and such that were held out of state. So,
What was it like to work for your father?
I'm sure it was pluses and minuses.
It was. He would have to call us in the office every once in a while and say, look, this is the way we want to do things here. And, but he wasn't looking over our shoulder all the time.
No.
And we knew the responsibility we had. And, I think when you come out of college or you're not familiar with the business world, you kind of have an idea, well, the money to make payroll and pay taxes just comes there by happenstance. No, it doesn't. You have to produce a product, ship it, and hopefully that you'll get paid for your product within a reasonable amount of time to where you can meet your financial obligations. And it was an education to the business world. We had to learn that to make sure that the quality of the product we had was of equal value or better than the quality of our competition. Because if you don't sell. If you don't sell, you don't make any money, and you've also got the responsibility not only of yourself but all the 100 to 130 employees and their families that work for you. And
I guess
Ricky?
That's one of the most competitive businesses you can find, isn't it?
Well, certainly in those days, domestically it was, even before the imports really started, coming in from mainly Southeast Asia and India and
When
such.
did that start?
I would say probably in the 70s sometime, on a lot smaller scale. But of course in North Carolina, the Burlington, Hickory area, they were known for a lot of textiles and also furniture and such. But Tennessee, Southeast was pretty, in those days, Southeast had a lot of hosiery production, even over in Dothan, Alabama, and such. And a lot of that, not only did our company, move from Philadelphia back in the 20s to the Southeast, but there were a lot of other ones up in the New England area where textiles at once were very large that came south looking for, frankly, cheaper wages and such, place regulation.
Yeah. Why don't we just jump ahead to 82? What happens in 82? Why did you all sell the business?
Ricky,
Well,
you're probably more up to that.
Okay, basically, there were some issues, like I said earlier, we were somewhat seasonal, had to build an inventory, and of course to build inventory, that took money because certainly all of our suppliers wanted to be paid. The old terms back in those days, 2% 10, net 30, meaning they want to be paid 30 days after receipt of it. But the prime rate in the late 70s, early 80s had gotten to 21%. Now you compare that today to what interest rates are.
Yeah, this is runaway inflation, and it double-digit
yes,
inflation.
very much so. And there were, some other issues like we were talking about earlier. The imports had started making a little bit of impact. But I would say pretty much the cost of money and running that was the prime.
82 is right at the end of those bad times that we had in the 70s.
Yes, sir. And we, you could tell we went, Rick, we were running 3 shifts.
Not complete shifts,
but shifts. And at the time, probably during our peak period, Dr. Scott, we had 130 employees. And when you gradually see that get below 100 employees and you go down to 2 shifts, and we were being in the dye house, I could see in processing our orders, they weren't coming in like they were. And but I kind of knew something's up. And then,
Well, and Bobby, one thing we actually did the last year that we ran a full year, we did ship as much as we ever had, both from a unit standpoint as well as dollar. We grew the business, but of course that was even putting more strain on the amount of money needed to carry us through the winter and spring seasons. We were growing inventory.
but my dad, he called me when I was at Dallas, called me, he said he needed to come up to the office. And I knew something was amiss because I could tell by the tone of his voice, and went up there, and he said, we're going to operate for another 30 days, a month.
There was a timeline.
And this was probably about 8 o'clock in the morning. And he said, I need you to call the employees down there together and tell them what's going on. He kind of laid out the guidelines. And I remember asking my dad, can we wait till after lunch? Because usually after you've had a lunch, you're in a little bit, mood to accept that. And he said, no, you need to tell them now. And I may get emotional. That's the toughest thing I have ever had to do.
Same here.
And even had an employee back there, he said, Bob, if we took a pay cut, would it help out? And I said, no, it wouldn't even do that. And we're not have to want to go through that again. Of course, they were just such great people, the employees that we had, and we were fortunate enough. And some of them, we had a small group that were probably getting ready to retire, but we were pretty much able to. And we told them, start looking for a job. We'll give you a great recommendation, and don't worry about giving us a 2-week notice. If you get a job, you go for it. Go for it. And pretty much get everybody else employed.
Where did they go? What kind of jobs?
Some Colson Clark was still running the thread mill on the south side of town, was still operating then. Of course, Lockheed was in the area, but Lockheed would only hire when they would get a new contract. And as a matter of fact, that's where I wound up going to, worked there for 30 years. And it was a little bit strange from the standpoint that working at the mill, Lockheed, they would vie for labor. Of course, they were paying a lot more than we could afford to pay. So whenever Lockheed got a new contract, C5A, C5B, something like that, C141s, a lot of I'll say a lot, some of our people would leave and go there. And you certainly can't blame them for trying to better themselves financially and such. We used to kind of curse Lockheed a little bit in that regard, but then I ended up working for Lockheed, so you be careful what you think. So,
What did you do at Lockheed?
I was in the started in production scheduling, and then stayed there for about 10 years, and then spent my last 20 years in the master scheduling area on basically C-130. And, I was fortunate enough to be on a program that is still in existence, the longest running production program in the history of the world.
So, looks like it's going to go on forever, doesn't it?
Well, knock on wood. Hopefully so.
Yeah,
Hopefully so. But it was a very bad time to have to tell the employees that unique because they had been so loyal for the most part over the years. And just to reiterate what Bob just said, Dr. Scott, it's the hardest thing we've ever had to do. A lot of time and emotional expense there.
Yeah, but you all had to look for a job too.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Now, Bob, what did you do? Where did you go?
Went to work for a company called Conklin Tin Plate and Metal, which is now Conklin Metal Industries. And at the time, they were the second oldest privately owned company in the state of Georgia. The oldest company was John Smith Chevrolet, which started out as John Smith Carriage company. But if my memory serves me correct, Conklin Tin Plate was started in, I think, 1874.
Was this in Atlanta?
This was in Atlanta. It was probably about 3 blocks east of the Capitol building. And Worked for some great people. Mr. Harry Thompson was the president of the company. John Skokstad was the vice president. Worked for a sales manager named Mr. Wade Knowles, who was also a World War II veteran, but he was just a very decent man. And started out working in the warehouse, driving a forklift, and had done that for about 6 months. And Wade Knowles, our sales manager, he said, "President of the company, Mr. Thompson wants to see you in the office." And I'm thinking, "Oh, what have I done?" And Mr. Thompson called me in there. He said, "We're wasting your talents down there. Mr. Knowles thinks you would be better, and you would serve us better as being an outside salesperson." And they explained to me they're going to give me a company car and all of this. And I'm thinking, good gracious sakes alive. So went to a little school to kind of learn how to handle yourself in outside sales, but spent 21 wonderful years with Conklin Metal Industries. And they have actually grown. They probably have about 6 or 7 branches in about 5 different states now.
But both of you lived in Acworth all this time?
I was living in Marietta. Well, actually Marietta and then Woodstock.
Oh, okay.
Woodstock, Georgia.
So you live in Woodstock now?
Live in Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Oh, Chattanooga.
Went to work for a company called Commercial Roofing Specialties, and was actually commuting 41 miles from Woodstock, Georgia to College Park, Georgia.
Okay.
And would have to go.
That's a big commute.
Around 285, and then you'd see brake lights and everything. And sometimes I was fortunate enough to have the job and work for another great company. But sometimes I didn't make it home till about 7 o'clock, and it would take me about a half hour to
That's about the worst commute I can imagine.
come back down. And the president of our company, Mr. Larry Burns, called me in his office one day, and he says, "We are thinking very seriously about opening up a facility in Chattanooga." He said, "Sleep on this for a week and let me know, talk it over with your wife." And he says, "I know most of your friends and relatives are in this area, but," he says, "get back with me in a week and let me know what your decision is." And Dr. Scott, I'm kind of looking at him with a poker face thinking, well, I'll think about it, but I'm thinking, dear Lord, thank you, I'm out of here. and made the move up there in March of 2004. Still miss this area. I'd love to come back to Acworth and go to our little mini reunions we have, but been in Chattanooga with my wife Sarah since 2004. And people up there are a couple of spots traffic gets a little bit iffy, but I said, if you want to see some traffic, spend a day with me on 285.
Well, although 24 is mighty crowded, it seems like every time I go by.
It is. It absolutely is.
Well, why don't you talk about how Acworth has changed over the years since your childhood?
Well, I think when we were growing up here, Acworth had a population of maybe 2,000, and of course, repeating some of the stuff Bobby said earlier. Of course, had the Acworth Pharmacy and Lacey's, and we would go back and forth there to go to the old soda fountains that they had back in those days. Get a quarter sundae or 35 cents for a banana split and such. And Acworth was pretty busy back in those days. Had the old Gulf station. I think Carl Presley had right downtown here when they used to have the red light and the buildings on the other side where the parking spaces are now, right next to backed up to the railroad. But things were busy in those days. All the other the retail establishments from J.F. Collins Son and Johnny Green's, Allen's, Five and Dime and such. Then in the 70s when especially when I-75 opened, I believe that was around 77.
December of 77.
I believe so. Then of course that took away a lot, and the big box stores also had an impact, certainly on the like Eaton's department store and some of those. So Acworth had started declining from just the busyness that it would have. And in the meantime, when I started working at Lockheed, my wife and I, there were no real new housing developments going on. So my wife and I actually moved out in the Kennesaw area, about Pine Mountain Road and such. Got our first house there. Lived in Acworth and up until that point in time. Got a job at Lockheed and even moved closer to where I worked, so I didn't have that hour and a half commute that Bobby had to deal with. And then fortunately, after I've been retired about 4 years now from Lockheed, and we were living out on due west Road, about 6 miles west of the Marietta Square. And we decided that we wanted to come home, and a little over a year ago bought a house, our old house that we grew up in back in the 50s on Collins Avenue.
Oh, really?
And we've been living there just a little over a year now. And it's very nice. Of course, the town has been revitalized, and nice restaurants, just good.
The city fathers have done an outstanding job through the years of. We've even got friends in Chattanooga that will make day trips down to Acworth to go shopping, visit the restaurants here, and they've done an outstanding job of making Acworth really an historical place to visit.
And keeping, we can walk downtown,
Sure.
and we can walk home in the dark, have no worries. Of course, you can't be totally lax about those things in this day and time, but
When I come down to visit, I always say, Rick, are you ready to go for our walk? And we will leave his house and may spend an hour or 2 hours walking down to the beach, walk around some of the neighborhoods, and just reminiscing about the good days. And they seem to still be here, which is hard to maintain.
really is. And I know when something my brother gifted me one time was when the old Acworth Elementary School, when they were tearing it down, and we're going to build McCall Primary School. I guess that was about 2003, 2004 approximately, but it kind of shows how sentimental Bobby can get at times. But he went by and got a couple of bricks from the old building and kept them, gave me one of them. So it's a nice little memento to have. But,
Great. Well, what have we not talked about that you would like to talk about for the interview?
oh, goodness.
Well, reminiscing a little bit, and I'll try to make this story short, and I'm probably going back to 1958, 59. This was when Elvis Presley was on the TV, the shows, and the girls were going
And you were
crazy.
10 or 11.
Yes. And they had a talent show over at the Acworth Gymnasium. And people would get up there and either sing, play an instrument. And Owen Bryant,
He was one of the...
he did a impression of Elvis Presley. Now, he was lip singing, and they had the Elvis Presley records in the background. You would have thought Elvis was there. The girls, the crowd was standing cheering. Now, the gymnasium was packed. And at the end of his performance, he was down there actually signing autographs for the little girls. It's Elvis Presley. Now, he had his hair combed back and everything, was dressed up, and you would have thought it was Elvis. But that's one of the memories I have of growing up in Acworth.
Mentioning the old gym, they used to have live Atlanta wrestling. People
Yes.
would come back, and this was probably early, about 1962 or so. And they'd have wrestling matches with the professional wrestlers. And, you could see some of the stuff. Being there in person, you could see some of the put-ons that they would do, exaggerations and such. But, and then, of course...
It wasn't authentic?
Yeah, not totally. But and then the flats being part of the school, spent many days down there. Even at recess for schools, and then even later on, we got into building model rockets, some friends of mine. And we'd go down there, and that was the biggest open spot, Estes Rockets, that you could go down and shoot. But I hated with the McCall primary, they kind of did away with the flats. There's a little smidgen of it left, but not much. So, but no, this is just a great area to grow up in, and still I think is. So, with a lot of hopefully good opportunities, and people will stick it out here.
Well, all right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you,
Scott,
Dr.
thank you,
Scott.
sir. Appreciate that.